record or whatever, and then we'll start when... Excellent. So we're in the Gospel of John, and in this Gospel, John is telling that story that we were kind of talking about. He's telling that story of Jesus Christ and his work on the cross on our behalf, in kind of like a macro way, and it's a big long story. But right in the beginning, you see salvation by grace through faith. In chapter 3, you're seeing the work of Christ on the cross. You're seeing it throughout this gospel, and you see it actually happening towards the end of the gospel. Well, anyway, through this Gospel of John, things have been kind of escalating lately, and they're going to continue to escalate, really, through with maybe a parenthesis, really through the end of this gospel. Some of the people think Jesus is a prophet. Others think that he's a false teacher. Even some of his own followers have started to kind of like turn against him. We saw that several times. We saw at the end of John 6, we saw that they didn't like, the saying was too hard, and so they left. They walked away from him. So many, except, as John writes it, seemingly the 12, one of which was the betrayer. We even see at the Feast of Booths in John 7 and 8, we see people that were so-called followers of his start to turn away from him, start to turn against him. But his biggest opponents, and this is a theme that runs throughout the Gospel of John that you can't miss if you're paying attention, his biggest opponents are the religious leaders. Opposition is a theme that John brings up over and over. You see it chapter after chapter after chapter. These religious leaders clearly understand that Jesus is claiming to be God. And that's undeniable. You can't miss it. At the end of John chapter 8, you can't miss it. When they take up stones to throw at him for blasphemy, when he said, "Before Abraham was, I am." They got it. They understood. They picked up stones to stone him for blasphemy, and he hid himself and went away from them. Last week, and we're not exactly sure of the timing, but it seems that it would be right around the temple complex, perhaps right at the end of the Feast of Booths as Jesus is leaving the temple complex. Last week, Jesus sees a blind man, a man who was born blind, and he gives him sight. And it's an awesome miracle. It's a miracle that authenticates who Jesus is. And by the way, that's really what the New Testament miracles were. They were authenticating. They were authenticating that God was giving a new message. Those New Testament miracles were authenticating that God was speaking. There was a period of closed vision, and then when that open vision started back up, God was speaking again. He was giving us new truth. There was authenticating miracles. Of course, now we have everything we need for life and godliness. But these were authenticated, and this miracle authenticated who Jesus is. And when the crowd sees it, there's amazement and there's confusion. And so they bring the blind man to the religious experts, the Pharisees. Check this out, John 9:13. And I'll have it on the wall so I'll be highlighting stuff and whatever. John 9:13. They brought to the Pharisees the man who was formerly blind. Now, you might remember that the Pharisees here, they are pretty popular with the people. The Sadducees, as we understand, we're not 100% sure of this, but most people think or understand that the Sadducees were the ones who were the majority party in the council, the Jerusalem council. They were the large portion of people that were in that council were Sadducees, but the Sadducees weren't popular among the people. One of the reasons was because they didn't believe in a resurrection. We see that in the New Testament. But they were a little more strict maybe than the Pharisees. The Pharisees were the people that they were the teachers of the people out in the public. So they were more popular, and the Sadducees used the Pharisees in order to have influence with the people. All right, so the Pharisees were an important player. That's why we see them showing up quite a bit in the New Testament and in the Gospels, because they are kind of the agent between the guys who were in charge, the Sadducees, and the people. The Pharisees were that in-between type of a group. Well, anyway, it would only make sense for the people to bring this formerly blind man to the Pharisees. It would kind of be like today. It would kind of be like asking your pastor a theological question. You know, generally speaking, that's the guy you're going to ask. You're not going to ask one of the most popular teachers on the planet. You don't have access to that guy. I don't have access to him either. But you're going to ask your local pastor, the local pastors, and that's kind of how these Pharisees were. These are the guys who were teaching in the synagogues. Now, there's one key piece of information that we haven't seen up to this point, but John brings forth in verse 14 that affects the way these Pharisees are going to see this healing. Look at verse 14. Now, it was a Sabbath on the day when Jesus made the clay and opened the eyes. You might remember, this is not the first time Jesus healed a person on a Sabbath day. He did it also back in chapter 5, and there he healed a paralyzed man, and the religious leaders made a big stink about that. They made a big fuss about it. The craziest thing about these religious leaders' beliefs is that they believe that a medical doctor can heal someone on a Sabbath, like they could do medical work on a Sabbath because it's an emergency. Like you probably, let's just say today, like if you needed heart surgery or you were, something like that, they obviously didn't have heart surgery back then, but if you needed heart surgery and it was like an emergency thing and they're throwing you in an ambulance, that's the type of thing we're talking about. Like emergency procedures are okay on Saturdays, but maybe today something like getting your tooth pulled could wait a day, until the following day. So that's kind of their thinking. So you can do medical work in the first century Israel on a Sabbath, but Jesus can't heal a man on the Sabbath. That's kind of their thinking. They're not okay with Jesus performing a life-transforming, life-changing miracle. A man who's been blind his entire life. They're not okay with it. If you're paying attention, you already know what these Pharisees are going to think about this healing. They're going to say, and John brings up two things. So he brings up that it was Sabbath, and he brings up two things connected to this healing. One is that Jesus made the clay. And what would the Pharisees say? They would say, he was working. He made clay. He was working. You remember he spit on the ground, right? We talked about that last week. We're not going to rehash all that this week. And he made clay to put on the man's eye. That making of the clay, the kneading of the clay, or whatever you want to call it, that's work. I did more work shaking up a protein shake this morning for breakfast, right? I'm trying to lose a few pounds, and I'm being told that, anyway, it doesn't matter. So that was more work than kneading, right? So that's work. They would say, that's work. And also, opening his eyes is work. Healing the blind man on the Sabbath is work. So we already know what these guys are going to say, right? Nevertheless, when they see the blind man, or the man who had been born blind and who was now healed, they want to know what happened. And so the blind man tells them in verse 15. The Pharisees also were asking him again how he received his sight. They had heard the report, but now they want to hear it from him. And he said to them, he applied clay to my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Now, I'm fairly sure this is not everything that happened here. If we know anything about the Pharisees, we know they're not like succinct. They're not like, what's the word I'm looking for here? They're not short and to the point. Like they are going to find out as much stuff as they want to find out about Jesus. It's not going to be like, hey, so how'd you get healed? Oh, okay, cool. I imagine there's kind of like a mini inquisition going on here. But John doesn't give us all that. He just says they want to know, he sticks to the facts here, right? Gives basic summary of how things went. But the point was clear. Jesus healed the blind man. He gave sight to a man who was born blind. This is really a continuation. Last week, this week, and really you can say next week, are really all part of the same passage. And it could really be one message, but there's just so much in each of those sections. I wanted to deal with more than just a quick summary of what happened. Well, anyway, what happens next is very interesting. And if you're paying attention to the Gospel of John up to this point, a little bit unexpected. Not entirely unexpected because of something that happened with Nicodemus back in chapter 3, but a little bit unexpected. Look at verse 16. Therefore, some of the Pharisees were saying, "This man is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath." Right? But others were saying, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And there was a division among them. And so, up until this point, the crowds were divided. Back in chapter 7, we saw some of that. But now, even the Pharisees are starting to be a little divided about Jesus. There's some Pharisees that are like, I'm not sure if Jesus is such a bad guy. If you had to guess one Pharisee who might have thought Jesus isn't such a bad guy, what guess would you put out? I think I don't even know if we have to call it a guess, right? I mean, Nicodemus would be probably one of these guys, given what we saw in chapter 3 and given what we see at the end of the Gospel of John and how he handles Jesus' body and stuff like that. But even some of the Pharisees are divided. Some think he's a Sabbath breaker. He's a false teacher. Others realize that this could only come from God. And so the Pharisees, divided as they are, they come back to the blind man. And they want to hear more about what he has to say about Jesus. What's your opinion of Jesus? Verse 17. So they said to the blind man again, "What do you say about him, since he opened your eyes?" And he said, "He is a prophet." So I find it kind of interesting that they want to know what this guy's saying. I don't know I don't know any more than what's here. But I suspect that there's maybe like some of these guys who are against Jesus who just kind of like, they just want to get off this idea of the debate among the Pharisees and just go back on the attack somewhere. Because that's what these guys do. They're always attacking. We already saw that. We saw the manipulation of these Pharisees just a few chapters back. So I don't know if that's exactly what's going on. I suspect it. But what do you say about him since he opened your eyes, since he healed you? And he said he's a prophet. So this guy, this healed man, this formerly blind man, he's not quite there yet, but he's on the right path. He's starting to figure out, obviously, Jesus is something. He hasn't quite gotten to the point that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, necessarily. But at this point in John, and by the way, I'm not saying he's not going to get there. You'll find out next week. So you got to come back next week to hear the rest of it, right? And if you got to listen to last week if you weren't here. But anyway, at this point, all he's saying about Jesus is that he's a prophet. He's clearly a prophet. As one guy writes, the blind man is beginning to see more clearly, while the Pharisees are becoming more blind. That was interesting. That's a metaphorical statement, but well, anyway, the Pharisees, they're not really satisfied with how things go with this formerly blind man, so they call in his parents in the next verse. They want to make sure that this miracle actually, these guys, they're like the supreme skeptics. I'm not sure if this is what really happened. Let's find out from the parents if this is what really happened. So they call the parents and they ask them about the situation in verses 18 and 19. The Jews then did not believe it of him. They didn't believe it. I don't know if this is true. They did not believe it of him that he had been blind and had received sight. They maybe thought he was a huckster, he was lying. Until they called the parents of the very one who had received his sight. And questioned the parents, saying, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? Then how does he now see?" Now, it doesn't take rocket science to figure out that the parents know their kid, right? Imagine if you see a blind man, he's going to look a certain way, he's going to carry himself a certain way, and then if he's healed, perhaps that changes to the point where it's like, oh, even his eyes look different now. He's carrying himself differently. Maybe there's like, is this the same guy? Because remember, this guy is in Jerusalem, so he's living there. Some of these people know him, but maybe the religious leaders don't know him, or maybe they do, I don't know. And they're not sure that's even the same guy, so they ask, is this the one? Is this your kid? And they know who the parents are supposed to be, right? So they're able to send those parents in and find out if it's actually the guy. The parents would know if this is their son, if he was born blind. They would know what would happen. By the way, can you imagine how awesome that day would be as a parent? You know, if you're a parent, you know, I mean, you want what's best for your kid, right? Does anyone say, you know, I hope my kid is a failure? Oh man, I just hope he fails. I just hope he becomes a real loser with a capital L. And anyone like that here? Anyone like, oh man, I just can't stand my kid. I just want to smack the smug look off his face, you know, whatever. Like most of us love our kids. Most of us want what's best for our kids, right? So if there's something wrong physically, you ever have a kid get sick, and I mean like he's real sick, and you know, you can't think or pray about anything apart from your kid when he's sick. It makes me think of when Joshua had pneumonia and was hospitalized. You know, that was a major thing for our family. You know, it was like there was nothing else on our minds except we wanted our kid better. You want what's best for your kid. Now these guys, they've gone, and we don't know how old the man is, but his whole life being blind. You're raising a blind child. You're going through all the difficulty, and you know one day we're not going to be around to support him. One day he's going to have to make it on his own. And what's going to happen then? I imagine that's a really difficult spot that very few in this room would understand and be able to relate to. And then these parents find out that their son, who had been born blind, who had lived his whole life blind, he can see. That would be a pretty glorious day. That'd be an awesome day. A day that the Pharisees kind of ruin to a certain extent. I can't imagine the Pharisees can ruin that day, but they sure tried, right? Like they're not thinking about this, you know, come on, seriously? Think about what's just happened. You know, think about how this person's life, think about how this family's life has changed. But, you know, that's not how the Pharisees think. They don't think that way at all because they don't care about people. They don't care about people. This is a great day for the parents, but they're afraid of the Pharisees, and for good reason. Verses 20 through 23, his parents answered them and said, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But how he now sees, we do not know. Or who opened his eyes, we do not know." Now, they may know, they may have heard, or they may not know. We just don't know. Or they're lying. We just don't know. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself. Again, as a parent, I imagine I would know these facts by now. I imagine I would have found out. But, you know, we don't know, again, for sure. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. So it seems like they're not really telling the Jews what they know. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed him to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. The implication there is that the parents seem to understand that this prophet healed their son, and they've heard a few things. I mean, the triumphal entry is going to be happening. You know, they've been waiting for him to come into the city at the Feast of Booths. Is he going to come? You know, so there have been times where, you know, they know who Jesus is. The people of Jerusalem know who Jesus is. In fact, they're afraid to say his name for fear of being put out of the synagogue. So they know who Jesus is. And when they find out their son's been healed, it doesn't take rocket science to figure out this was Jesus. This is Jesus. Anyway, the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed him to be the Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. For this reason, his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." Yes, this is our son, but he's old enough to answer for himself. That means he's at least 13 years old in New Testament times, but we don't know exactly how old. They're not willing to say any more than that. They already know what the religious leaders think. They already know that they'll be kicked out of the synagogue, and that would be a terrible punishment in that day. It would bring shame and embarrassment. I know that sounds foreign to some Americans, and that's because so many Americans have no shame. So many Americans couldn't care less. Couldn't care less. I couldn't care less. They couldn't care less about what the local church thinks. Because you know what? If I get kicked out of one local church, I'll just go and start my whole business and I'll pretend to be something at the next church until they figure out who I am or whatever else. They don't care. Getting kicked out of the synagogue would have brought severe shame to an ancient Jew, but getting disciplined out of a local church doesn't mean much of anything to a modern American. It meant something to these guys, and so they decided to keep their mouths shut. Listen to what one guy says. He says, afraid of being ostracized from their community, some were afraid to speak the truth about Jesus. Yet we know that eternity hangs on him. Are we willing to suffer ostracism when people respond with hostility? He asks. Too often, so-called Christians would rather keep their mouths shut. That's kind of what these parents, they're not Christians in the same sense we are, but they know enough of what's happened to be afraid to talk about it. And that's too often the case with so many so-called Christians. They'd rather blend in with society than stand out for Christ. They're too afraid of the consequences, and that's unfortunate. And I'll ask, are you like that? Are you too afraid to speak up for Christ among your friends or coworkers or employers or whomever, family? The conversation with the parents, that should have ended this account. That's where it should have ended. They've gotten every piece of evidence that they need. Now they act. That's what should happen. We've heard from the crowds. They've brought the blind man. We've heard from the blind man. We've heard from the parents. We've heard from everybody what the situation is. And so we have everything we need to know what the situation is. But it's not enough for these guys. They find out that he's been born blind. They seem to understand that a real miracle has taken place, but they don't seem to get it because they reject him. And so they bring the blind man back in, the formerly blind man, in for round 2. All right, look at verse 24. So a second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, give glory to God. We know this. We know, and look at the content of their knowledge, we know that, and this is the content, this man is a sinner. This is where the rubber meets the road for the blind man, or formerly blind man. They want the blind man to say that Jesus is a sinner. That's what they want. To essentially renounce Jesus at some level. Deny that Jesus is from God. Notice the guy's answer, and I love the guy's answer in verse 25. He then answered, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. This guy doesn't know anything about Jesus apart from what happened, but he knows that his whole life he was blind, and he knows that he sees now. He knows what Jesus did for him. He knows that Jesus has completely transformed his life. That fact is undeniable. The Pharisees don't like that fact. Kind of like the liberal media, right? You could report facts all you want, but the liberal media they don't like the facts, they don't report the facts. I'm sure it's the same on the conservative side, but the liberal media worse. It's wild. Some of their interpretations are just stick to the facts. Just report the facts. That's all I want. If CNN would just report the facts, that's all I want. I won't even think about turning them on because they don't report facts. They don't report the facts they like, and then they twist everything else into some ridiculous fact. Listen, does Fox do that? Yeah, they do it too, but it just doesn't seem as egregious as the ridiculousness that we see from the liberal media. Anyway, I'm sorry, this is not about politics. Just report the facts. Well, these Pharisees, they don't like the facts. And just like CNN, they are not going to report those facts if they don't like those facts. They're going to manipulate those facts and turn them into something else. And that's what happens here in verse 26. So they said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? Well, you already have the facts. You already have that. You already asked that question. They already answered that. The people, the witnesses answered the question. The blind man, the formerly blind man answered it. The parents, you already have the facts. Just believe those facts. Maybe report them as well. But they can't accept those facts. It's like they can't process the information. They're not willing to accept it. Look at the blind man's answer in verse 27. He answered them, and I like this too, I told you already. It's like you ask a question, it's like you're not really, like you don't really like the answer, and then you ask, so it's like, did you eat the last cookie? No. Did you eat the last cookie? You just say it again louder because you didn't like the first answer, That's kind of like what's happening here. They're just saying it again, I imagine. What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he answered them, I told you already, and you did not listen. Everybody on that side was like, listen, I've already told you. How many times do I have to tell you? I already told you, and you did not listen. Why? Why do you want to hear it again? You do not want to become his disciples too, do you? This guy's speaking my language. So as most of you know, my love language is sarcasm. It's not, words of affirmation or, I do like gifts, I will say that. I like gifts, usually in the form of, like liquid gifts. That is, like liquid asset, like money. I like money. So I want a machine where, if someone gives you a card, you could just put the card into the machine and it tells you if there's money. And if there's no money, it just shreds the card. And if there's money, it just pulls the money out and gives you, I'm just joking about that. But my real love language is sarcasm, right? Sarcasm. I like sarcasm, but it's got to be friendly sarcasm. It can't be like the tear you down and make you feel like this sarcasm. Like it's got to be fun. Okay, it can't be like shredding someone apart. Some people don't know that line. They don't understand where that line is, and they're sarcastic, but it's like really at your expense and makes you kind of feel bad. I don't like that sarcasm. That's not my love language. If I'm sarcastic with you, that's my love language. That's how I relate. Well, that's what this guy's. I can't but read, as a sarcastic person, I can't but read sarcasm. Can you read anything besides sarcasm in the last sentence there? I read sarcasm. I could be wrong on that, but do we think the guy's like, do you guys really want to become his disciples too? I think the guy's figured out what's going on here, right? He can kind of figure out these guys, because they've already said to him, tell us that this man's a sinner. Give glory to God. So he already knows he's being sarcastic. I love it. You do not want to become his disciples too, do you? It's so sarcastic, it's perfect. Hard to imagine, hard to read it as ignorance, easy to read it as sarcasm. Now, how do you think the Pharisees are going to like that? Think they're going to be like, oh, that's a good one. Oh, yeah, that's good. Yeah, I got one back. Get out of the synagogue. You know what I mean? Maybe, I don't know, something like that. Look at verses 28 and 29. They reviled him. That is, they spoke down about him. They spoke negatively about him. They tore him apart. The word it's similar to the word like blasphemy in a human sense. They reviled him and said, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know, again, one of these proclamations of what they know. It's like like when the Pope speaks, it's from God, right? When he speaks ex cathedra, that's what these guys are. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he is from. They call this man, they think they're insulting him. You're his disciple. That's not an insult. Not to this guy. That guy just changed. Jesus just changed that guy's life. That's not an insult. It's not an insult. But they say, we know that God has spoken to Moses. Well, let me tell you something. They are right about that. But if they understood Moses, then they would understand that Jesus is the Messiah. So they may know some facts, but they don't know how to to interpret Moses or the rest of the law. Another thing I want you to notice here is this. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, they can't even say his name. They can't even say Jesus. They say, this man. We don't speak that name around these here parts. That name's not even part of our vocabulary. This man, as for this man, we do not know where he's from. Oh, yeah? You don't know where he's from. Okay. The healed man's pretty shocked by that response in verses 30 and 31. The man answered and said to them, well, here's an amazing thing, that you do not know where he is from. And yet he opened my eyes. Again, the guy's speaking my language, man. I get this guy. I get him. I really do. Well, here's an amazing thing, that you do not know where he is from. And he just opened my eyes. We know. This is something that we know. I know you guys said we know this, but we all know, like when the Pharisees say we know, that's an exclusive we. All right, that means we know, but you don't. All right, sometimes we use exclusive we's in our conversation. We know, not including you, but we do. This guy's like, we know, that's an inclusive we, that's all of us. We all know that God does not hear sinners. But if anyone is God-fearing and does his will, he hears him. This is a miracle, an undeniable miracle. And yet you guys are rejecting it, and that is what's extraordinary. That is what is an amazing thing. The blind man may not know a lot about Scripture. He may not be an expert in the law, but he knows what everyone knows, that God does not hear sinners. And it's fairly clear in Scripture. Check this out. Psalm 66:18. If I regard wickedness in my heart, the Lord will not hear. So he knows that. And they all know Proverbs 15:29. The Lord is far from the wicked, but he hears the prayers of the righteous. They know that. And they know Proverbs 28:9. He who turns away his ear from listening to the law, even his prayer is an abomination. So if you are turning your ears away from God's word, that is, you're hearing the word of God and you're remaining in your stiff-necked and stubborn and rebellious state, I will not listen to that. Your prayer the word here is an abomination. And so if Jesus is a false prophet and he is disregarding the law, then even his prayer for a man to be healed, is the idea here, would be an abomination. I love this man's boldness. I love it. I love his sarcasm. Verse 32, since the beginning of time, it's like, okay, this is fantastic. It's just, he's really heaping it up. Since the beginning of time, it has never been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born. Is that better? Okay. You were born entirely in sins. And are you teaching us? What do we see there from the Pharisees? We're seeing pride. We're seeing arrogance emanating from them. They insult the man and exalt themselves. By the way, when someone tears you down, usually it's a tactic they're using to make themselves look better. There was a kid I had on our team in the spring, baseball team in the spring, that I was helping coach, and this kid was just, he would just try to tear you down, and I said, you think that makes you look better when you tear other people down, but it actually makes you look worse. And eventually people will figure that out. They may not figure it out when they're 12, but adults figure that stuff out most of the time. And then they put him out, verse 34. They cast him out of the synagogue. They mete out heavy judgment against him, but he doesn't care because Jesus is greater than the synagogue. In this passage, the characters are important. And there are three classes of characters that we see. First, you have the Pharisees, and they're against Jesus. They've rejected him as the Messiah. They set themselves against him. They claim he's a false teacher. They go after him and anyone who follows him. They have seen for their entire lives, and yet they're absolutely blind spiritually. There are a lot of people like that today. People who reject Scripture, whether it's a clear rejection of Scripture or a more passive rejection. That is, they'll say something like, oh yeah, Jesus is a good man, but they don't do anything about it. There are people who reject Christ, and those people are doomed to an eternity in hell. And that's Scripture. And that's undeniable. So there are people like that, and I hope that's not you. And if it is you, I call you to repent today, to turn away from your sins and turn toward God in faith. Don't walk out the doors, you repent today. You have the Pharisees, you have the parents, and I think that could be a group that some of you, if not many of you, might relate to. The parents can't deny the facts. They've seen an undeniable miracle. Sure, they rejoice with their son whose life was changed, but they're too afraid to speak up. They're too afraid of the consequences. And I say there's a lot of people like that today. A lot of people in churches like that today who are too afraid of the consequences of talking about Jesus. People who perhaps place their faith in Christ even, but they're too afraid to tell their lost friends for fear of being ostracized or being looked down upon or being thought of as weird. Too afraid to tell important people in their lives. People who profess Christ, but they're too afraid to stand out in the world, so they'd rather just blend in with it. I think there's a lot of people in churches like that. People who compromise their beliefs because they're not willing to face the consequences of those beliefs. I think there's a lot of people in churches like that. Then you have the man who was born blind and is now healed. And his life is so changed, so transformed. He was once blind, and to make it a metaphor for us, weren't we too? This is not a metaphor passage. It's not about the spiritually blind who can now see. It's a literal guy who was blind and who sees, right? But man, aren't we like that guy a little bit? People who realize how Jesus has transformed their lives so much that they don't care about the consequences. That they'll talk about Jesus and preach the gospel regardless, with, we could say, reckless disregard for the consequences of sharing our faith. Is that you? Are you that person? This blind man speaks boldly about Christ, about the Messiah, even though he doesn't even really know who he is yet. And he stands up against the most powerful religious people of the day, and he pays the consequences for it, being cast out of the synagogue. And I would say there aren't a lot of people like that today. There aren't many people who will witness for Christ without regard for the consequences. There aren't many people who will be bold for Christ and stand up for him among the lost and dying and worldly of this life. I know it's been a little long today, but I would ask you, which of today's characters most accurately describe you? Which describes you? Are you the Pharisee who rejects and opposes Christ, the parents who are too afraid to speak up for the truth, or the blind man whose life has been so transformed by Christ, so dramatically changed that you can't help but speak for him? And it's okay to be a little sarcastic against the naysayers at times. I do it. Which one do you resonate with the most? Which one do you relate to the most? A genuine Christian will be a bold witness for Christ, regardless of the consequences, because he recognizes and appreciates who Jesus is and what Jesus has done. If you take your hymnals and turn to 373, we're going to close our service with a hymn. If you're not sure you're saved, then you see me or you come forward during the invitation. We'll get you lined up with someone. If you need to repent, listen, this is important. If you're anyone but the blind man who has now been given sight, and anyone but that guy who boldly witnesses for Christ, if you're like the parents who are afraid to witness or blend in, I'm not saying the parents blend in with the world, but maybe you do. If you're that guy, you can take that moment right now and repent while we sing. If you're the guy who's lost and you don't leave this place, you see me, and we'll get you lined up with someone to explain the gospel more clearly. Stand and sing 373.